Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. I don't trust Zoom, so basically this is going to be a short, like, in-class exercise. Um, so there are three types of experimental of study design to which the scientific method can be applied. And honestly, there's more than that. There's the experimental, where basically everything is randomized, where you can randomize your variables, you have control variables, and you have experimental variables. You randomize assignments of your experimental variables. There's a quasi-experimental, where some of the variables can be randomized, but not all of them. Some things are fixed. Or perhaps you say something like, I'm gonna have you can another thing that you can do, and this actually falls into observational as well, is that you can statistically randomize something, where you say, well, I have a wide range of this measure and I can fix the other measures because I have a large population of data. And then there's observational, which can either be cross-sectional or longitudinal. So do people understand the difference between cross-sectional and longitudinal? Basically, a cross-sectional design is where you say, okay, I'm going to send out a survey to 500 participants at this one point in time, and I'm going to take their answers and assume that they're all kind of basically in the month of, let's say, August 2023. Maybe it's open for that month or whatever, and that would be a cross section of respondents, as opposed to a longitudinal, where a longitudinal, you would ask the same subjects the same questions month to month or year to year or over some period of time. As you can see here, basically we were measuring a variable, and the person, we had like one, I don't know, however many subjects there are dots there, so I think 27, and we measured the same variable over block 1, block 2, block 3, block 4. Yeah, within session, that's a longitudinal study. Now, if we had people and we only took information from block 2 and nothing else, that would be a cross section of that longitudinal design. So that's basically what you're looking at. So cross-sectional designs are frequently used in surveys, where you just you're gonna choose data over a large number of people, and that way you can you get a large sample size, but you've only asked the person once, so you can't make any assumptions about what variable precedes the other variable. Okay, so this is I'm just going to have you guys answer. So this is a description of an experiment, of a study design. Manipulates factor levels to create treatments, randomly assign subjects to these treatments, and then compared the responses of the subject groups across treatment levels. Is that an observational, experimental, or quasi-experimental study design? This is experimental, fully experimental, because you're randomly assigning the subjects to the treatment levels. So if you don't have the ability to randomly assign subjects, that's when it becomes quasi-experimental. And I have to say that I've not seen the term quasi-experimental that much. I think it's more common in certain psychology experiments, large psychology experiments. Okay, yes, so experimental is the correct answer. Now, research shares similarities with the traditional experimental design of randomized controlled trial, but it specifically lacks the element of random assignment. to treatment or control. This is quasi-experimental. I just literally just said this in the last which was kind of sort of a guess, but whatever. So yeah, that's a quasi-experimental. Subjects are selected. It is not based on random samples. They usually focus on estimating between groups or associations between variables. So estimating between group differences is I think what they were shooting for on that. And that is that observational, experimental, or quasi-experimental? A. It's observational. Okay, now I want you to read this description and then decide, because I don't want to read it out loud because it's a lot to read. Then decide which of these experimental designs this is, and then put it in the meeting chat box. Yeah, I would think that this is experimental. Let's see what the book says. Yeah. So yes, it's experimental. Now read this next one. Although research suggests that active learning is associated with positive outcomes. I think this is I think technically this is quasi-experimental, but I'm not 100% sure. Yes. Because, and the reason for that is that really you have these blocks of classes. So they're stuck within you're only randomizing a class. So, you don't really have a full randomization. And I think that was kind of a tricky one, to be honest. It definitely was clear, but let me see. So we have one more here. The one thing that's important here is that they're randomly assigned to self-construal or value orientation groups. However, the groups that are collectivist versus individualistic are not randomized. So while this says experimental, I honestly agree with most of you guys in saying that it's probably quasi-experimental. And the random assignment is what makes it experimental. Now, most human studies, one thing we think about when we think about randomized controlled trials is we think about the controls part. So we can't be very controlling of variables in human studies. It's just difficult. But yeah, I think that I would, because of the randomization, it could be it's experimental, but I would maybe differ with that, to be honest. I totally understand where you guys are getting sort of caught up on it. Okay, study objective. Dietary patterns are important for the physical and psychological development of adolescent girls. The purpose of the present study was to evaluate the relationship between dietary patterns and depression in the population. So you can read the methods and everything. So what do I think about this one? So that, yeah, is observational. That's definitely observational. And like I said, I don't use the term quasi-experimental that much because, if you really think about it, if you think about your experiment, you say, well, what didn't I control for or randomize? There's going to be an almost infinite number of things that you can pick because you can't control every aspect of the environment, and you can't randomize every aspect of the environment.